Welcome to the Maintainable Software Podcast, where we explore the art of improving existing software with seasoned practitioners who have helped organizations overcome the problems often associated with technical debt and legacy code. I'm your host, Robbie Russell. On this episode, Carola Lilienthal joins us, who is a writer, speaker, software architect, and the managing director at WPS. Carola joins us from the south of France. Carola Lilienthal, we're so glad to have you join us on Maintainable. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Robbie. I'm very happy to be here as well.
So as you reflect on your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
Well-maintained software, from my point of view, is a software with a clear structure where developers that don't know the system understand quite quickly what is going on, where to fix a bug, where to find your way around, where you have to go when you want to change something. So for me, structure, and often people say the architecture, needs to be simple as possible. And this means as well the same solutions everywhere if you can, I propose a lot to use patterns and things like that to give the people the same pattern again and again, and you can see it and say, oh, this is the same. This works like this. So I have to go there and change this and all that stuff. So easy structure, a lot of automated tests. That's absolutely necessary. Second characteristic in a way. And not too many different technologies. So simplicity everywhere in the end, as well in the structure and in the use of technology. And then there is another characteristic, for me at least. A good system has to be modular so that you can have smaller pieces inside, modules that you can give to a small team of 3 to 5 or 7 people who work on it. And that keeps down the cognitive load for that team. If the software is if the structure is good, you should have modules already. But if you don't find domain bits in there, domain modules for something from the domain which is fulfilling a task together, then you still have a problem with a huge system from my point of view.
I'm curious about, you talk about patterns. How often are you coming into situations where, or you have much experience coming to environments where the software's been around for a number of years and there are maybe different patterns from different eras of and so how do you think about trying to determine which patterns to continue following or whether or not you should be introducing a new one? And I ask that because I talk with people on different teams where they're in that situation. They're like, well, should we follow what the original developers were doing, or someone else was doing this and this seems to be working, but what if there's a different way? And so they're worried about introducing maybe a third pattern, and then with that, because they don't know if they're going to get a chance to go back and refactor the other one. So how do you think through that?
What I try to do when I get into a company and I have the chance to work with them on their architecture, and that for me means also to work on their pattern language, which in the end it's a language. And I hope that most classes in the system belong to a pattern in the end, and we can talk about this different view on the source code. And of course, normally we find different layers of patterns in systems because another generation of programmers had new ideas. I even had an IT manager once who said, well, my programmers are artists. They have to invent new patterns every now and then because otherwise they don't feel good and they don't work well. Well, this is a bit far out from my point of view, For me, it has to be, I try to have a language that is consistent in a way. And I try to, whenever I find a good system with a good structure, very easy to maintain, then someone did an effort to describe those patterns and to teach them to new developers when they start in the company so that they know this language and that they can relate to that language and use that language and not start to invent the same thing over and over again. But nevertheless, there are new frameworks with new patterns. Times are changing. Old patterns from Martin Fowler and that time, you don't do that anymore because we have better ideas today. So, of course, there is old source code in systems with patterns that we don't do anymore. And if you don't have to touch it, just leave it alone, I tell the people. But if you have to touch it, then, well, use the scout rule, and just repair where you change something, If you have to find a bug in this old stuff, it's going to be hard, but maybe you can understand those patterns, or hopefully they are documented somewhere, which is very important. I tell people it's a treasure, an architectural treasure to document your pattern for the future, and then you can understand what's going on and maybe change that part where you're working on to fix the bug or to enhance something to the new pattern world. So it's a never-ending story.
There's a couple of interesting things you brought up there. One, maybe you said that you might not have the same view, but there's that perspective that teams or companies feeling like they need to give their developers enough freedom to experiment with new ideas and be, air quoting, be creative or be artists with how they're thinking about the work that they're doing and how they can evolve it or what have you. Or it's like, oh, this new paradigm is going to solve all of our problems. How do you find that balance there with the team, with giving them some flexibility to do that? Because you don't want to be like, just keep doing it, because then I feel like that's a really challenging thing for like people leading engineering teams.
Yeah, that's true. What I try to do in our company is to really bring forward the value of the domain and of understanding what are the users doing and why. Why are they doing this? And to gain domain knowledge and find good solutions for the domain problems and to understand more and more about the domain, because it's so complicated what the users are doing out there and what the system has to support and incorporate concepts like this and that, and to put your energy, your interest in innovation there. This is what I try to teach young people, and not to be too much into all that technical stuff. But this is hard because the technical stuff is much easier because it's ours. We don't have to ask other people and all that stuff. But this is what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to give them play fields, please try out this new technology in this little project here, over here, but not everywhere, So it's about leading people and keeping, nevertheless, the architecture in an easy and straightforward manner. Yeah, you have to convince them. It's hard.
Architecture plays such a crucial role in maintainability. So I'd be curious to kind of explore your perspective on what makes good architecture.
I wrote my doctor's thesis I handed them in 2008. And I wrote it about complexity of software architecture. So I worked on the question, what is complex in software architecture and what can we do to reduce complexity? So if you ask me what is a good architecture, I started with that already. It is simple. It's not complex. And to find the solution, how to describe what is easy, I looked into cognitive science. And I looked into cognitive science to find out what is complex for our brain and how our brain deals with that complexity. So if we build our architecture in a way that it is built to help our brain, because our brain is working like that on complex problems, then the architecture will be easy for our brain, for everybody to understand. And in cognitive science, they describe all kinds of stuff that our brain is doing to deal with complexity. And 3 things are really interesting from a computer science perspective. The first thing is that our brain is doing something that is called chunking, which means that our brain is all the time taking bits of knowledge, it's chunking them into huge, larger, bigger pieces of knowledge until we understood something, and then it gets, hopefully, from our short-term brain to our long-term brain. But, and that's the important point, chunking only works if the things that we are trying, or the knowledge pieces that we're trying to chunk, really mean together something reasonable. I mean, they belong together. They are not bits and pieces from all over the world, and they are not related. So the knowledge pieces have to be related. And in our discipline, we have a word for that. We want to create modular pieces. So modularity is exactly that. Modularity is the main solution to help chunking, but only if the things that are in a module, a class, a package, they do something that belongs together. And this works very well with cohesion and coupling, something that has cohesion. That means I always explain that with classes in a package. If the classes in a package have one task to do together, one thing to come, they work together a lot, and they don't need much from outside of the package and then there is cohesion. These classes work together. And this is modularity. High cohesion and loose coupling. You don't need much from outside. Somebody says, do it, and then these classes are doing it, blah, blah. And then the result is sent outside. So this is the first thing our brain needs, know? We can...
Hey listeners, it's Robbie here. It wasn't all that long ago. I'd find myself debugging a weird issue in one of our clients' Rails app. I log into one platform to track down the error, only to realize it was tied to some performance issue. And guess what? That meant hopping over into a completely different tool and trying to match things up based off of timestamps, if I was lucky. And let me tell you, my productivity didn't exactly thank me for that. Enter AppSignal, our podcast sponsor, and the tool that eliminates all that back and forth. They bring error tracking, performance monitoring, host metrics, custom metrics, uptime monitoring, and logging into one seamless platform. It's a single source of truth that helps keep your app running like a well-rehearsed symphony. Whether you're working with Ruby, Elixir, Node, Python, or tracking front-end errors in JavaScript, AppSignal has your back. They're always adding support for more languages and frameworks too. And here's the best part. AppSignal won't break the bank. Plans start at just $23 US a month. Plus, they're ISO 27001 certified and fully GDPR and HIPAA compliant, so your data is safe. Oh, and because you're a loyal Maintainable listener, you can use the promo code maintainable at checkout for 10% off your first year. So head over to appsignal.com, tell them that your good friend Robbie from Maintainable sent you, and start making your app soon. I'm thinking about, you brought up that short to long-term perspective there, and like thinking around, when people are joining an organization and getting up to speed, or however you want to phrase it, so they can feel like they can contribute. And so, I was talking to a consulting client a couple of days ago, and they were talking that their average developers take about, they're like, maybe 8 months before they feel like they really start to understand their domain. They work in healthcare, and there's a lot of like interesting regulations, and at least in my part of the world, complexity there, but probably everywhere. But when we were talking through that, and then we were talking about like, well, what are some strategies that they're trying to experiment with to help their team shorten that? And is that even possible? And then they're like, well, we can talk about how we onboard people the first few weeks. And they're like, but they also admit, they're like, we can't give them too much information too quickly because they're only going to remember some smaller percentage of it. And then they don't want to be in that situation. Like, I thought we told you this already. And like, it's just like, you got to be mindful of that. And like, so they're very aware that could happen, but then they're almost afraid to share too much information too quickly because of that. And so I'm like, I don't know what sort of advice would you offer to teams that are kind of thinking about their onboarding to not just the technology, but the architecture, and be like, how do we introduce people, get them comfortable so they can feel like they understand and know who to go talk to or where to look? Because sometimes in really big existing software projects, it takes a while to figure out where, like, change this button on a web page is like, okay, how do you even get to that in the code?
From my point of view, new people need an overview in the first place. So what is this whole thing about? Which is often a diagram of modules with modules inside maybe, and interfaces, APIs, whatever, And then I like to give people access to our architecture decisions. So we try to have an architecture decision record for our systems, because from my point of view, you understand most about an architecture if you read why they have done it that way, Why did you do it that way? And in an architecture decision record, you can read that. There is normally, well, we had these options, and because of that, we decided to do it like this, and so on. So not just diagrams, but decisions. Decisions are so important. They explain so much. And then, well, we normally try to give new developers as well a perspective on the domain. Here's the domain again. And we do this with techniques from domain-driven design, like event storming, rarely, but rather domain storytelling, which is a technique where you can see the whole process with all the users that are involved and what they are doing, which data they are sending where, and who is responding, and how the whole thing works all together. Of course, you can have much more detailed descriptions for smaller parts of the system, but to have a whole overview, well, what does this software, what is it doing? Who is using it and why? I think this is really important. And then sometimes we have something that is called a context view. So you see the system and all the APIs around and all the users and other systems. So your system is a black box and you see the context. This is often very helpful because you can see the complexity that is there. And then, of course, the pattern language, which is really important, which is one of those things that our brain is doing. If you want to head into that, I can tell you what cognitive science says about patterns. But so we have to teach the new people our pattern language. And then they know about the domain, about the architecture in big terms, the small architecture, the microarchitecture on the pattern language level. So normally then they know their way around. So 8 months sounds long.
It does sound long. I get that. Could you tell us a little bit about Modularity Maturity Index?
This is related to my doctor thesis because I found it in cognitive science. I've created this model of complexity, which was about modularity, I'm just going to say them, hierarchies. So our brain likes hierarchies and we can do layered architecture in all sorts of directions. And the patterns, because our brain loves something the cognitive science called schema. Our brain has schemas all over the place, schemata. And these three main topics, we have about 21 metrics that we measure or that we discuss under architects when we talk with the people about their architecture. And these 21 metrics are calculated and they all come into the MMI, this index, with some percentage. And in the end, you get a number between 0 and 10. And if your system is really bad, which in domain-driven design they call a big ball of mud, then you will be between 0 and 4, somewhere down there, really bad. And if you're in the middle, you're between 4 and 8. So down there you're red and then you're yellow. And if you're green, so really good, you're between 8 and 10. And yes, we have done about 300 systems with that index now. I mean, the algorithm to calculate the MMI is in books, so everybody can do it. It's not a secret story or something. And well, it really helps to explain to management what is the problem with the technical depth in the system. What do we have to do to get better, to get to a situation where maintainability gets easy again, where you need less developers for the bug fixing and all that stuff because they can work quicker. It's all about working quickly as well, because we all love this flow, we know where to go, we know where to change. Oh, here, another test. Oh, this, and, we all love that. And if the system is in a bad condition, we have all the time these breakouts. Oh no, what's going on? Oh no, this is what? And, every time the flow stops and we don't get forward. And this is, of course, a problem. Software developers are expensive.
I'm curious about, when you're thinking about providing that information to other decision makers, maybe the non-software part of, I try not to say non-technical people, but the product owners, whatever managers, and sometimes speak with lots of people that are the managers in organizations. They're like, what's happened? How did we get in this situation? And it's like, is it the team that's a problem? Like how did we get this big tangled ball of mud? Because they're like, I thought we hired good developers and this is what happened. So how can we trust that they're going to know how to get themselves out of this mess? How do you think through that?
I have these questions a lot as well, of course, because people think that we are engineers that make a big plan, like building a house, and then we do it, and then it's wonderful. And why does it get sort of tangled and all that stuff? But this is not true. We are not building houses or anything that you can plan in from the west, where you can do a
blueprint and just get your permits.
Yes, and upfront, that word was missing. Where you can do upfront design, we are not there because, and this is the point, because we are not producing the same thing again and again or something standard. What we are normally doing is that we are inventing something new. We're digitalizing things, processes that are there, but that should be done differently with digital help. So we are not replacing something that is there, but we are doing even development of the organization. We are changing everything with software. And managers often forget that. But if you talk about it, they will understand. They will see that the software, the first version of the software that they got, and this first version was probably in a good shape. They did a good job, but it was small. But it changed the way they worked. And then the users started to think, oh, if we can do it like this, perfect. We need that too, and that, and that. And then all kinds of ideas popped up, and they asked for new features, and again for new features. And of course, it's wonderful if somebody loves your system, and then you're doing new features, and you're doing them quickly because they need them. And well, you get money for that, of course. And if nobody is there at that moment to say, wait a moment, we built something like this from down upwards, and now we are building something the other way around from the side because this is another idea. And well, now we need time to get these two parts connected in a proper and simple way. And this means that we have to change the first thing we did, because otherwise we will have something wobbly, strange, big ball of mud, thingamy-bob. So, and if this doesn't happen, the thing will get huger, larger, bigger, in all kinds of directions. Everything is different. And you will have something really horrible after 5 years. This is how it works. And for me, it's like, sometimes I tell managers, well, it's like the people who built the cathedrals in the Middle Age. They tried to do it somehow, and a lot of them were never finished, and a lot of them broke down. We don't even know about them. And just some survived because someone had this vision that they really had to think about a good static and do experiments and all that. And we are like that time. We don't have anybody who is giving us a certificate for the static of our system, for the structure, The MMI is something that could give you that, but it's not legal or something today.
It's a good point. I think we talk with different managers, just to kind of keep using the same vocabulary there, where I sometimes get the sense from them that they didn't really know when they first set out to hey, we want to build a software application to do something. This is the thing we want to do right now. So we're going to hire some developers, whether it's contractors or bring people in, employees. Let's build this thing. And then, okay, yeah, we'll know that we'll need to fix some bugs from time to time and whatever, maybe do some small updates. But they don't often get the sense that they really realized this isn't a one and done thing. This is a forever project that never ends until you decide to pull the plug on it. And they're like, wait, how much am I spending on people to keep this thing alive? And it didn't feel like it cost that much initially. So there's this interesting, why does it cost more now than it did when we first built it? Do you have that sort of experience? And do you feel like developers are doing enough to kind of help educate those people before they make that decision? Or is it in our best interest to not bring that up so that we have work for ourselves in the future? Kind of jokingly.
There are two things in my head at the moment, and I'm thinking about where to start. One thing is that, unfortunately, in many companies, there is every 5 years a project to create some new software or to have some new software for something or to replace an old one. And then somebody is selected who will write down what we need, and then we ask someone to do it. And this person is doing, in general, this is a person who is doing that the first and only time in her life. And then we come and we read this, and we have done that already hundreds of times because we have a lot of teams that are creating software for a lot of different domains. And we can't imagine, or we don't even think about, when we are young, we don't think about that for this person, it's the first time. And maybe this person imagines in her head that she is buying a washing machine, a software which is like, you buy it, it's delivered, and it works for years. And us as development organization, this is so far out for us because we know that software is what you described. So we don't even talk to that person about that in the beginning. So we don't educate that person, but we don't even imagine that we should. This is just something that you learn when you have managed things like that several times, and normally you just learn it at the end of a project because that person says, and where is that and that and that? That's in the contract. And we have done a lot of things that were out of the contract just because we were nice. Oh, it's so horrible. All these discussions, This is the one side of the story. And now I'm looking for the other side.
We'll be back with our interview with Carola in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robbie. I want to take a quick moment to thank you for making time to listen to Maintainable. If you're finding these discussions valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers and or writing a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help spread the word. Also, is there someone you think I should have on the podcast sometime? Shoot me an email to robbie@maintainable.fm. And now, let's get back to our interview with Carola Lilienthal. It's interesting that thinking about this, so I run a software consulting company, and we usually come into projects that have been around for a while. But a long time ago, many, many years ago, we've been in business for a couple of decades now, but we work primarily with startups, and it was always that like educational process. And like, even if you felt like they understood it, it still ended up being towards the end. But what about, you brought up in our contract, we said all these things in the estimates, but I'm like, oh yeah, but we also delivered these 20 other things that were not there. And you approved that. And they're like, well, where's the disconnect? And you're like, well, it's just like contract stuff to figure out. Or then you get into other scenarios like, well, what happens if there's a bug in 6 months from now? Like, is that included? Well, we don't have a warranty on the work. There's that's a new edge case thing we didn't know. So we don't work with startups as much anymore. And partly because that part of it was just so difficult to manage expectations. Whereas a company that's already gone through that process is maybe gone through a couple developers, and then now they need help. They've already see the value of the project that's been around for 5 years. And we need to keep this thing going, and we need to make some improvements. We've not kept it updated, and there's some technical debt. They understand at that point. So it's I've been intentionally focusing down the road on the story of that particular project just to avoid all the complexity of helping educate, because even if you do educate, I'm having all these fun stories of sometimes the people that hired you early on aren't there at the end of the project. They get another job, and then someone comes in and they're looking at the contracts, and you're like, well, we had all these agreements with the other person. Oh, so it's a challenge.
It's really horrible, but I mean, me and my company, we have to do it because we have teams that create software. So what we are doing these days is we read the paper that they give us, and we write our paper to say, well, this is what we understood, and this is what we're going to do. And we try to describe this very precisely. We could be even Jira tickets, it doesn't have to be a document or something. And we ask them to approve that. And then we start to work. And if they then want something which is different, right away, we start the change game, we start with a change process. These days, which I never would have done 20 years ago because I thought we're going to be nice with the client, all that. We have a little party when the first change request is signed, because this is the moment when the customer has understood how the thing works, that he's only going to get what is in the document that we wrote in the Jira tickets, and we're not going to do nothing. In other years, like 10 years ago, we did all kinds of stuff. We were so nice to the customer. And then in the end, they were not nice because they followed the contract. And I convinced my colleagues to stop that and the surprising thing in this story is those clients where we directly say, well, you're going to get this. And anything you want on top, you have to pay extra. Or you have to change features. We can do that, but we have to write that down, and it's noted, and, it's in the contract. These clients, where we are very strict, they love us as well. And, because they get software, they get something that works, and they get what they want, and we help them to get what they want. But we are not too nice, because being too nice doesn't help you anything.
Do you have any advice for those listening that might be in situations where they're like, well, maybe they're a developer and I feel like this is out of scope, but they're not sure if it's they're asking for something that's only going to take me an hour and I'll just take care of it. Because it seems like going back to a contract might take more time. So let's just do the thing and then move on.
Unfortunately, it's never just an hour. as we all know. It's always more because we forget the test, we forget the edge cases. So it's always more. So from my point of view, the first estimate that you are doing, you have to multiply by 4 anyway, always. And then you know what this will mean. And as soon as you can, go into the fight with the customer and tell him this was not inside the contract. The first moment you can do that, do it with the first little thing, because that's the way to train the customer to do the thing in a manner where the software developers are not absolutely frustrated at the end and lose a lot of money on top. This is the game, you have to do it. You have to get into the fight. Don't be nice.
So I know that you've written a couple of books, Sustainable Software Architecture and Domain-Driven Transformation. Can you share what inspired you to write them and what readers can take away from them?
Sustainable Architecture is the book that I wrote from my doctor thesis. So I talked about it already in this podcast on complexity of software architecture. They asked me, could you write a book on architecture? And I said, yes, I can transform this theoretical doctor thesis into a book. And this is what you can find in Sustainable Architecture. There's a lot about how to build good architecture. I think there are about 200 diagrams of real systems. I always tell stories about systems that I saw and why this is good and not good. And a lot of diagrams are from architecture review tools that really work on the real source code, on the structures in the source code. So you will see real projects, real systems, and you will understand why modularity, hierarchy, and patterns are so important. So this whole cognitive science stuff is in there too, in one chapter. So it's not so, but you can understand it, read it, and then you know why you have to do it that way. So this is that book. And in my company since 2004, we worked with domain-driven design. We read the first book of Eric Evans, and for us it was, it opened our mind. We have done things like that a bit before, but this really told us how to build software from the domain, something that really helps the user in their work. So we really wanted that. And we did this since 2004. And by the time you're doing it more and more in 2012, I think, with microservices, DDD came into the world a bit more. So on conferences, they start to talk about it. And I started to talk about it too, because we did it since 8 years. And later on, we started to consult people, companies who wanted to do DDD, who wanted to cut their microservice into their monolith into microservices and all that story. And we formed a method to do that. So especially for legacy systems, for old systems, because, of course, people asked us, well, what do you think about it? We did the MMI for these systems. And then they asked us, what should we do now? So what is the method to come from where I am to something better? And this is what domain-driven transformation is all about. We transform legacy systems with a lot of ideas from domain-driven design towards systems that will be sustainable for a long time.
It sounds like two really great topics to cover in those books. Definitely include links to those for everybody in the show notes as well, so they can go pick them up. I think I might have to buy one of my new clients, Domain-Driven Transformation, and help them with that.
Unfortunately, the English version is on Amazon, but not printed yet. I'm so sorry, but there are videos. I can give you some links where I talk about it a bit more so that people can understand. And I really, really hope that the English version will come out soon. We are working with the editor of that series with Von Vernon on the text, and this takes some time to be ready for the English-speaking market.
Okay, understood. All right, well, we'll keep an eye out for that one and put links for your talks and stuff like that. And I'm curious. Couple of quick last questions for you. Is there a non-software, non-technical book that you find yourself recommending to people you work with?
These days, I'm a manager myself. I have a company with 170 people, and we started 2000 with 10 people. So we are changing all the time. And I love the book Reinventing Organizations by Frédéric Lacroix. Well, I don't know how you'd say the name in English. I only know the French version. But anyway, it's a really wonderful book, how organizations these days should function, how decisions should be made. And it works well with this agile idea and this idea of people working in little groups on their own and not having a manager who's deciding everything, which never worked. But anyway, so I love this book. Really, I can definitely promote it. And Team Technologies, of course. I mean, this is something everybody should read anyway as well.
Team Technologies?
Mm-hmm. This is a book about how to divide your company into teams to reduce the cognitive load for all the developers and everybody. So they invented an idea of different kinds of teams that you need: supporting teams, framework teams, value stream teams. And it's really, really nice to think about these different teams and not just about small teams, We just have agile small teams and that's it. So team topology is something on top. It's giving you an idea how to get those teams working with each other and which team has to do a service for another team and so on. So it's really a very good book.
Can you tell me a little bit about what WPS does?
Oh, yes. Our focus is on software with good quality. So we have today 17 teams of developers, small, big, depending on the software. And we are creating software for the harbor of Hamburg, for the town to coordinate the traffic works, for a huge film festival in Berlin, for the Rhine River, for the ships come to the harbor and so on, for the airport in Hamburg. So a lot of logistic projects and everything we learned in the last 25 years, we are trying to give back to the community by talks, on conferences, by consulting, of course, on money, by books. And one thing that is very special about our company is, which comes from my doctor thesis and this book about sustainable software architecture, that we are doing architectural reviews and calculate the MMI for systems. And I mean, the MMI is one thing, it's a number for the management. But the fun thing about the architectural reviews is the architectural work with the teams. So sitting in a group with the development team and having the system in a tool and trying out different architectural views on the source code and trying to show them, well, we could do it this way. Why did you do it this way? To discuss the architecture. This is really fun. And this helps teams a lot. I didn't mention it before, but if you have a new team for an old software, it's really a good idea to do an architectural review where you work on the architecture with the team in a tool, because then they will understand so much about the structure. Who did it? Why? What's this? And if there's someone who can explain, this is really great. So this is something we're doing a lot for clients as well.
Hey folks, it's Robbie here. I want to take a moment to tell you about my company, Planet Argon. Think of us as a day spa for your software projects, where legacy applications come to relax, rejuvenate, and get the care they need to feel brand new. Whether your project needs a quick refresh with staff augmentation, like a relaxing chair massage, or a more focused treatment with fractional development services like a deep tissue upgrade, we're here to pamper your software back into the tip-top shape. We specialize in technologies like Ruby on Rails, React, and Laravel. So if you know of a company whose software feels stressed out, tangled in technical debt, or in need of a fresh glow, send them our way. We'll help them unwind and look their best. Visit us at planetargon.com. Again, that's planetargon.com. All right, let's get back to the show. And remember, a little maintenance can go a long way toward feeling refreshed. Nice. And the reason I was curious to ask a little bit more about what your organization there does is the books you referenced. I was just curious, as someone that also leads a software consultancy company, I find a lot of books out there about team organizations and organizational stuff are necessary. They don't seem to be, they're not, I feel like running a consulting company is a very different type of business model than a lot of product companies or who your clients are. So I enjoy reading lots of interesting books about business, but I'm like, well, how do I apply this to my type of business? There's certain things, and so I'm like, well, I'm using this to help me better understand my client's situation. Do you find that there's like a gap in the educational stuff? Like, do you find well, that doesn't quite apply to us, but what can we learn from this? But then
I see it even in my company, We have software development teams and we have a back office. And those people are different. And I don't say that one group is better than the other, but reinventing organizations, team topology, this is for the software development part of the company. This is something that helped me there. And it took me a lot of time to understand that my back office people need a different story, They don't want all this liberty, freeness, to do things and to discuss things, because I'm not a dictator, I'm trying to get my company to grow like a plant. It's not something where I change things from like a boss and say, well, we're going to do it. And the software developers, they love that. And the other part doesn't like that too much, So you have to find a balance there. And I think this is the same with clients. I have never been in the role of coaching my clients to change their organization, because I always tell myself, well, I am a software developer. Really, this is what I learned. I didn't learn changing organizations or anything like that. So this is not my experience. I have a diploma and a doctor in computer science, but not there. So, wow, will I go there and tell them what to do? So I'm very careful about that.
No, I appreciate that. Well, where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations about software engineering and technical leadership online?
Well, if you look for me on social media, since we lost Twitter somehow, I'm on LinkedIn, And if you put in my name, you will find something, because I'm doing a lot of talks. There is from DDD Europe on YouTube. There are videos in English. Then, there's a lot more in German, of course. So if you are searching for me, you will find me. Put my name into Google and I'm there, on the website of my company as well. I'm not someone who is posting so much on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I'm looking for interesting stories. And if something is interesting, I just repost it. And you can see me on conferences. So a lot of DDD conferences, DDD Europe in Amsterdam, which is in summer always, the Kandinsky in Berlin, which is in November. There is what kind of English-speaking conference, the Architecture Gathering, which is as well in Berlin. So you can find me on conferences a lot,
Wonderful. I'll definitely try to dig up as many of those links for everybody and include those in the show notes. And with that, it's been such a delight having you join us on Maintainable. Thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us, Carola.
Thank you very much, Robbie. It was a lot of fun to discuss everything with you. We could go on for hours, couldn't we?
We could. But it's my birthday for everybody listening when we recorded this, so I'm going to go call my dad back because he just called me 10 minutes ago and wanted to say happy birthday. But thank you, Carola.
Thank you for having me on your birthday on top.
This
Thank you so much.
Such a delight. Thank you so much.